The European Union is once again tightening its economic grip on Russia. As of July 2025, a new 18th package of sanctions has been put into place, aiming to further choke off the funds Moscow uses for its war efforts. These measures are the most direct hit yet on the complex global energy trade that has allowed Russian oil to continue flowing despite previous restrictions. Europe's goal is clear: to stop money from reaching the Kremlin. They believe that by cutting off Russia's oil revenue, they can weaken its ability to sustain its military operations in Ukraine. This new chapter in the economic standoff is creating major ripples across the world, and India finds itself right in the middle of this geopolitical storm. A key part of these new sanctions is a significant reduction in the price cap on Russian crude oil. The previous cap was set at $60 per barrel, but the EU has now slashed it to $47.60. A level that is 15% below the current market value. This is a bold move designed to make it much less profitable for Russia to sell its oil. It puts immense pressure on buyers to comply or risk being cut off from Western shipping and insurance services, which are vital for global maritime trade. The lower cap is intended to squeeze Russia's budget, which heavily relies on energy exports to fund everything from pensions to its defense sector. Even more troubling for India is a new rule that directly targets refined petroleum products. The EU has declared it will ban the import of fuels like diesel, petrol, and jet fuel if they are made from Russian crude oil. This ban applies even if the refining process happens in a third country, such as India. This is a game changer. For the past few years, Indian refiners have been buying cheap Russian crude, processing it into valuable fuels, and then selling them at a profit to European markets. This backdoor route, as some called it, was a win-win for India and a lifeline for Europe, which still needed the fuel. Now that route is being sealed shut. The implications of this policy shift are profound. The EU is essentially telling the world that it is not enough to simply not buy oil directly from Russia. They are now tracing the origin of the molecules in the fuel they import. This move targets the very business model that has made India a major refining hub. It forces Indian companies to choose between their cheap Russian oil supply and their lucrative European market. The sanctions also target over 100 vessels in Russia's shadow fleet, making it harder for Moscow to bypass these rules using alternative shipping arrangements. The EU is methodically closing loopholes, making its economic wall against Russia higher and stronger. For India, the timing of these sanctions could not be worse. The country has invested heavily in its refining capacity, becoming a key supplier of petroleum products to the world, including Europe. In 2024, India supplied a significant 16% of all diesel and jet fuel imported by the European Union. This was a booming business, built on the foundation of discounted Russian crude. Indian refineries were able to buy this oil cheaply, refine it efficiently, and then export high-quality fuels to a European market that was desperate for supply after cutting its own direct ties with Russia. This strategy bolstered India's foreign exchange reserves and strengthened its position as a major player in the global energy market. The economic fallout is already becoming visible. Even before this latest package, India's petroleum exports to the EU were showing signs of decline. In the fiscal year 2025, these exports dropped to $15 billion, a sharp 27.1% fall from the $19.2 billion recorded in the previous year. This new ban on refined products, derived from Russian crude, threatens to wipe out a further $5 billion in exports. This is a substantial economic blow for a country that relies on exports to drive growth. The sanctions effectively dismantle a profitable trade relationship that was beneficial for both Indian refiners and European consumers. With India potentially being pushed out of the European market, other players are ready to step in. Gulf producers like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait are the most likely beneficiaries. These nations have their own vast crude supplies and refining capacities. They do not rely on Russian oil, which means their refined products will face no restrictions under the new EU rules. European buyers will likely turn to these reliable, sanction-free suppliers to meet their energy needs. This shift could permanently alter global energy trade flows, leaving Indian refiners with excess capacity and a need to find new markets for their products. The sanctions are also taking a more direct aim at Russian influence within India. For the first time, a Russian-owned oil refinery operating in India, a joint venture with Rosneft, has been specifically targeted. This move is designed to disrupt Moscow's downstream profits, ensuring that Russia cannot simply shift its earnings from selling crude to selling refined products through its overseas assets. This puts the Indian government in a difficult position, as it must now manage the operational and financial fallout for a major industrial facility located on its own soil. The message from the EU is clear. Any business entangled with Russian state interests is a potential target. India's dependence on Russian oil is not just a matter of profit, it is a cornerstone of its national energy security strategy. As a nation that imports over 85% of its crude oil needs, securing affordable and stable supplies is a paramount concern. Russia has emerged as a critical partner in this endeavor. In the fiscal year 2025, India's imports of Russian crude amounted to a staggering $50.3 billion. This accounted for more than one-third of the country's total crude oil import bill of $143.1 billion. In 2024, Russian crude made up an impressive 38% of India's total oil imports, making Russia its single largest supplier by a wide margin. Faced with this new wave of Western pressure, India's leadership has remained defiant. Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri, speaking on July 22, 2025, articulated the country's firm stance. He stated, "We will do what we need to do," emphasizing that the government's primary responsibility is to ensure energy security for the Indian population. He also criticized what he termed double standards, pointing out that many Western nations had historically relied on Russian energy for decades. This sentiment reflects a broader view in New Delhi that India must prioritize its own national interests, especially when it comes to providing affordable energy to its 1.4 billion people. The threat of penalties extends beyond Europe. The United States, under the Trump administration, has been making increasingly loud noises about secondary sanctions. There is talk of imposing severe economic penalties, including 100% secondary tariffs, on countries like India and China if they continue their energy trade with Russia. US Senator Lindsey Graham issued a blunt warning stating, "If you keep buying cheap Russian oil, we will tariff the hell out of you. We're going to crush your economy." This threat from India's strategic partner puts New Delhi in an incredibly precarious position, forcing it to perform a delicate balancing act between its energy needs and its diplomatic relationships. The risk of these American penalties is perhaps the most significant danger India faces. While the EU sanctions are damaging to exports, US secondary sanctions could be catastrophic. They could restrict India's access to the American market, which is a key destination for Indian goods and services. They could also complicate financial transactions conducted in US dollars, the dominant currency in global trade. Such a move would not only harm India's economy, but could also trigger a massive spike in global oil prices and stoke inflation worldwide, creating a far greater crisis than the one the sanctions aim to solve. The road ahead for India is fraught with economic and diplomatic challenges. The immediate consequence of the EU sanctions will be higher costs and logistical hurdles for Indian importers. To continue buying Russian oil while respecting the lowered price cap, Indian companies may need to find alternatives to Western shipping and insurance services. This means relying more on Russia's shadow fleet and non-Western financial mechanisms. These alternatives are often more expensive, less reliable, and carry a higher risk. Ultimately, these increased costs could be passed on to Indian consumers at the petrol pump, affecting household budgets across the country. The new sanctions represent a major test for India's foreign policy of strategic autonomy. For years, India has prided itself on maintaining relationships with all major world powers, refusing to be drawn into any single camp. However, the intensifying pressure from both the EU and the US is making this neutral stance increasingly difficult to maintain. India is being forced to make difficult choices that could alienate either its long-standing Western partners or its most crucial energy supplier. The government must navigate these treacherous waters carefully to protect its economic interests without triggering a diplomatic crisis. Ultimately, this is a very big deal for India's economy and the daily lives of its people. Affordable energy is the lifeblood of a developing economy. It fuels transportation, powers industries, and keeps homes lit. Any significant increase in energy costs can lead to higher inflation, which hurts the poor the most. The loss of a multi-billion-dollar export market for refined fuels will also impact the country's trade balance and could slow down economic growth. The jobs and investment tied to the refinery sector are now at risk, creating uncertainty for thousands of workers and their families. In conclusion, the EU's latest sanctions have placed India in a tight spot. The country is caught between its urgent need for affordable Russian oil and the risk of facing penalties from its Western trading partners. The government's mantra of prioritizing energy security is being put to its sternest test. How India responds, whether it finds new markets, negotiates exemptions, or pivots its energy strategy, will have lasting consequences. The decisions made in the coming months will not only shape India's economic future, but also define its role on the global stage for years to come.